think of heaven.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Crawling Around My Brain podcast. I am your host, Graeme Brown. And yes, that's correct. You heard it right. The podcast name is now called Crawling Around My Brain because while that is a Counting Crows lyric, and we have been doing a lot of Counting Crows on this podcast, we will be expanding to other things, and I wanted to change the name to kind of broaden the scope of things that we will discuss. Want to thank everyone again. The listenership for the first two episodes has been really surprisingly good and surprisingly high, so appreciate everyone's support, and really looking forward to things to come here on this pod. But today, we are not going to diverge from the path that we have set out on, as we have a very special guest. We have author Geoff Harkness, who wrote the book on the Counting Crows, literally. The book is called Rain King, The Life and Music of Adam Duritz and Counting Crows. And let me just tell you, while I'll share my thoughts further on the pod, it's a great read if you're a Counting Crows fan, or if you're just a music or like culture of the 90s fan. Cannot recommend it enough. So you can go to Amazon and you can find that book. Again, it's Rain King, The Life and Music of Adam Duritz and Counting Crows. I'm super excited to have Geoff on. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with Mr. Geoff Harkness.
Loving me in a black bird. I think of dying. Come on, lay me down and feel the flame.
Welcome to the program, Mr. Geoff Harkness. He's the author of the book Rain King, The Life and Music of Adam Duritz and the Counting Crows. Geoff, really excited to have you on the podcast. We have had a few earlier podcasts talking about the Counting Crows, but when I read your book, I realized that we have to get the man on who literally wrote the book on the Counting Crows. So welcome to the program, Geoff.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I could have introduced you as Dr. Geoff Harkness, as you do hold a PhD, as well as an MBA, and you have a very impressive CV. But do you want to just share a little bit about your background with the audience? And I know that you spent some time as a music journalist. And so whatever you think might help folks understand why you're really the authority on this subject.
Okay, thanks. Well, you know, my background is someone who I kind of grew up immersed in music in some interesting ways. I had a little bit of an almost famous childhood. My mother got into concert promotion when I was, 10 or 11 years old. So I spent, my early teen years attending every single concert that I could see, going often backstage or sitting on the side of the stage. I met a lot of different famous people. I mean, Stevie Ray Vaughan and Joe Strummer and Annie Lennox, and so just interesting folks who were doing great things at the time. I also, when I was 13, got a job at this legendary record store in Kansas City called the Music Exchange. A million pieces of vinyl in stock, and every person working there an expert on a different type of music. So it's a real education.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, right. It was fun. I also played in bands too. And so I was playing in bands around town when I was like 15. And when I was 17, I moved to Los Angeles and spent 4 years living there and working in record stores and playing in bands and just sort of having the time of my life. So came back to Kansas City. I spent some time as a college radio DJ. And my first job upon graduation was as a music journalist, which was a dream job. The first interview I ever did was with Questlove from The Roots. And during the time I was a music journalist, I just interviewed an amazing group of folks. I mean, I can think of like Geddy Lee and Lil Wayne and Joan Baez. And, one of the people I interviewed during that time was Charlie Gillingham from the Counting Crows. So I
saw that.
Yeah, still have that interview, still have the cassette, old school. And dug that out and transcribed it and used some of that material in the book. For sort of fast forwarding, I also have this sort of fusing my interest in music and music journalism with my academic stuff. I ended up going to Chicago, where I did a 6-year study of the underground hip hop music scene. And I wrote a book about the relationship between gangs and rap music in Chicago. That was my first book. And
Wow.
this Rain King is actually my fourth book I've written. This is the fourth book I've written, but my other three books were scholarly. Two of them are specifically very much about music, but scholarly monographs with university presses. This was in some ways kind of a return to the music journalism side of my writing. So I've had this, life where I've done a lot of, had a lot of experiences with music. And during the time I was a music journalist, I think I published about 1,000 pieces. So I
Wow.
certainly do have a background
Yeah.
in music writing and music journalism. And what they say about, writers is you should write the books that you want to read. And to me, it's just was incredible that there wasn't a biography of Counting Crows. This amazing band sold so many albums, still touring. You hear them everywhere.
Right.
Springsteen, Prince, the Rolling Stones, they all have 1,000 books. Everybody's got a book. How could there not be a book about Counting Crows? I just literally, for 20 something years, I've been waiting for this book. These are the books that I read. So finally I decided that I was going to write that book. And
it's amazing. I mean, as you can tell just by your description, you've had this life, around music and meeting interesting people. And, I want to read your other book about the underground hip hop scene and the relationship to gangs. And that's all very interesting stuff. And it's impressive too, because I feel like out of all of these opportunities and all these different, choices that you had about where you were going to lean in, as you just said, you decided, here's a band that hasn't had that story told. And the episode preceding this one on my podcast, my friend and I did a kind of a deep dive into their background. But I mean, it was just scratching the surface with the amount of information that you were able to compile in this book. So I guess you explained why you chose the Counting Crows, but was there any personal reason? Are you a big Counting Crows fan? Is there, besides just the fact that there wasn't this book, what was your personal connection to the band?
Huge fan from the beginning. I was working at a bookstore when I think it was November or December 93 issue of CMJ, College Music Journal, came out. And it always included a CD in it. There was one of those magazines where they gave away a CD in every issue.
Right.
So the employees would get the free ones at the end of the month. And I would always take that CD home because I was such a big music fan. And Mr. Jones was, I think, maybe the second song on that disc. And I just remember playing it and immediately, like many people who love that song, connecting with it. But I played it, 20 times that night or something. Right. I had no idea who the band was. This is prior to social media, so you couldn't just dial it up and find out. But it's like, wow, this is an amazing song. And then, of course, I got, eventually got the album and fell in love with it like everyone else. So Counting Crows, I've been a fan of theirs from the very beginning. I think in some ways there are two types of fans, broadly speaking. There are those who loved the first album and thought that the band never topped it. And then there are those who loved the first album and also think that the band grew and did very interesting things after that. And I'm in that second group of fans. As much as I love August and everything after, I also followed and loved their other albums for the most part. But I'm also, I think, a critical fan. If you read the book, it's not a fanboy take on the band at all.
No.
And, I bring in critical voices from those who wrote about the band, those who are in the band. And also I introduce my own critiques of, where I thought the band maybe could have done better.
Yeah, it's actually have a couple quotes from your book that I was going to ask you about that are that kind of fill that whole spectrum that you're just talking about. And, I know I've said it a couple times already here in the first few minutes, but for those people that are interested in the Counting Crows, you really just captured so many nuggets. I had started taking notes on the various, sources that you were referencing. I mean, it's a really wide range. At some point you've got something called Pop Dose. You've got River City's Reader. You've got the Harvard University School Paper. I mean, it goes deep. You've got, things that I had read before that were maybe some larger publications, and then some other ones I'd never even heard of before that have really, really good insights to them. So it's really an impressive list. And plus, as you describe in the book, you take it kind kind of in eras, right? So all the research and all the things you're quoting and the documentation is coming from that time. So it's not someone looking backwards and saying, "Oh, here's what I thought." It's what was actually happening in the moment. And so I think it's really incredible. But I wanted to ask you before we get into the specifics. What's the reaction been? Have you gotten reactions from the public, or even maybe from the band? Have you gotten any feedback on the book?
Yes. The feedback from Counting Crows fans has been extremely positive. They're all like me. They're waiting for this book forever. We've all been waiting for it. And the thing is, I knew that everyone was waiting for this book, and I knew how serious the Counting Crows fans are about this band and every little detail. And, it was very important to me to try to, get all the details right, which is never totally possible with this type of story. But also, as you say, it was super important to me that even the most hardcore fan would learn something from this book and go, "Oh my God, I had no idea. Where did he get this?" I went to the ends of the earth to find the deepest, things that I could find, things that no one would else find. So the reaction so far, preliminary, it just came out from the fans, has been very positive. But I was in Omaha for the opening night of the tour.
Oh, nice.
And I knew a while back. I mean, part of it was I had this sort of goal that I wanted to get this book out. And then I thought, oh, the band's coming to Omaha. I could just drive up there and see the show. That would be fun. I've done that drive before, and I've seen them in Omaha before. So when I looked, I was like, wow, wait a minute. They have these VIP tickets you can get, and I could actually maybe possibly hand a copy of this book to Adam. Would that be possible? So this was all done a while ago, but long story short, now here comes the show. And I went and talked to the sort of concierge, who said, I'll take a copy of this book to Adam right now and give it to him. So I wrote an inscription to him, and I gave it to their folks, who then took it to him. And they said, he's got the book and he knows that you're going to be at the sound check.
Wow.
So then we go to the sound check. There's maybe 10 of us there. And the band's on stage, and they're warming up and talking amongst themselves. And, we're all just sort of watching. And I think maybe, they played a song or something like that. And then Adam comes up to the microphone, and he says, insider information. And then he starts telling us his take on why Matt Malley and Ben Mize and the other members of the group who have departed, why, in his opinion, they were no longer in the group.
Oh, wow. So it's like he read your book backstage briefly and then came on to speak about it? I mean...
So he starts sort of telling us this, but I was like, he's talking about things that are in the book. Is he talking about the book?
Right.
But then I thought, no, whatever. So then somebody says to him, no. Immergluck says something to him, and he says, no, that's in chapter 5. You got to read it to chapter 6 and see what he says. And I said to my friend, he's talking about the book.
That's awesome.
He's definitely talking about the book. So I said, well, we were talking about they were talking about Matt Malley and why the bass player left the band. And I said, well, was it something to do with the letter that was written in Rolling Stone? And so Adam comes over and starts talking to me and explaining, he was saying, well, we didn't want to fight on the tour bus, but my friend starts to videotape, and Adam's like, don't film this, So I'm not going to go into too much detail about exactly what he said, but basically, the conversation was around those sort of things.
Wow.
And he said, are there any other questions? But he did sort of go into a long thing. And I had some other questions about Matt Malley. I asked if the yoga and his yoga stuff had something to do with it. And to clarify, Adam said, no, that stuff was all really good for him. As I wrote in the book, he was into that long before the group. And Adam said, in his estimation, that they had not taken advantage of him or steered him in the wrong direction, that all of that had been very positive. So,
wow, that's amazing. I mean,
that's a little corrective, or if you want to say Adam's sort of take on the yoga thing. But he did have some other things, his sort of reasons, and I'll leave it to him to say those. But as to why Matt is not in the group
left
today,
the band. Yeah.
But we had a little conversation about this, and then he said, "Are there any other questions?" And I said, "Well, are you going to do an interview for the revised second edition of the book?"
Get him on the record. There you go.
Yeah, like let's sit down and talk. And he was like, whatever. But he turns to me and looks at me and he said, "Thank you for writing this book."
Wow.
And I'm like, I'm done. I'm good. I'm right there.
Yeah. Wow. I feel like we buried the lead. We're 14 minutes in.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
You asked, but
wow.
I knew I was coming today with this story that no one's heard because it's just happened.
Wow.
Anyway, that was extremely exciting. And then shall I continue?
Unbelievable story about you meeting Adam and handing him the book, having him. I've been to those kind of pre-show activities when you sign up and you can hear the band do their warm-up check and all that kind of stuff. To have him be actually talking about that stuff is very unusual. And I've seen him do it where he stands with his back to the audience during that part and seems very disinterested. So obviously getting his hands on your book, having enough time to read through some of it, and then coming over and having a conversation with you, that's just incredible. I mean, I guess, how do you feel about that? Was it like validation for this work that you put in, or what are your...
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Very, very gratifying. And it's in some ways it's hard because I didn't want to pull any punches with this book. I wanted it to be honest. And I don't just mean in terms of the critical stuff, but just it's an honest account of what's going on in his life. And that's not necessarily fun to be a subject of a book that has that sort of material in it. And I tried, I was coming from a place of respect and I was really focused on the music. And I hoped that he would see that and not just think that it was a salacious sort of take on his life story, because that was not my intention. And I think he could see, hopefully that it's coming from a place of, really respecting the music and centering the story around the music.
Yeah, I think I had a bunch of different questions for you, but just based upon this conversation, I want to kind of go in a slightly different direction here. But for those that are haven't read the book yet, and again, this is just one of the many nuggets, is that so bassist Matt Malley at some point writes a letter or an email to Rolling Stone, correct? And he basically says that George W. Bush actually did a good job and stood up for the values of our country and things like that, right? Took kind of a positive spin. And you can explain this in a little more detail. And so that you thought may have been one of the reasons why his political views maybe had diverged from the rest of the bands. That's like kind of the basics story, right?
Yeah, so I found in the darkest archives of the web, and I remember when this happened too, because I was a fan and also a subscriber to Rolling Stone magazine. But it was the week of the 2004 election between John Kerry and George Bush, and Matt Malley had this letter that got published in Rolling Stone magazine that week. John Kerry was on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine that week for the week of the election. Here comes in the letters section, this letter and he says, "I'm the bassist of the Counting Crows." Right. And I think, your magazine has done a disservice to George Bush and not sort of presented the whole picture here. Right. And he did, he's done a lot of good things. And I think it says like he was a great president. I quoted it word for word in the book. Yeah. And I actually had to get, track down. You can't find it online. I had to track down a copy of the magazine itself. And it would, because they don't publish the letters necessarily online. I think the band wanted to bury this. But I found that and published it. And I wondered because, not long after that was the Oscars where Accidentally in Love was nominated for an Oscar. And he wasn't there. He was out of the band at that point. He's gone from the band. This is November 2004. He was gone by the end of the year. So wow. I said my theory in the book was that was kind of the last straw, or something that was it. They right. said, using the band's name like that, going against what we wanted to do. So that was kind of my theory in the book. So let me bring this story back to Omaha real quick.
Sure, no problem.
So I say, Charlie Gillingham is on stage. I say, Charlie, I've got some copies of the book. I want to give one to everyone in the band. So Charlie comes over and hops off the stage and comes down. And Charlie and I are now just face to face having a conversation. And I had copies of the book with me. I wanted to make sure everybody had one. And so I said, here's, 6 copies, because I gave one to Adam. Here's one for everybody else. He said, we've already got 2 backstage, so I only need 5. So this is when I knew Adam already had the book.
He had the book. Incredible.
He already had the book and had read it. And this is why they were talking about it. They had a copy of it. So
wow. That's amazing. That's incredible.
Yeah, right. So Charlie says, I only need 5, but he takes them. And then we talked for a long time. He said he loved the cover, which I've heard a lot of great things about the cover. I was so happy to hear that. He loved the cover. He thought it was beautiful. And Charlie said the same thing. What he said to me was, this is his term, that was great reporting. So Charlie had really, really nice things to say about the book. He said he loved the cover, which was great to hear. I was really happy about that because I love the cover image too. And what he said to me about the Matt Malley letter was, he said, that was really good reporting. That was really kind of great reporting that you found that.
Right.
Kind of his take on it. So that made me feel like, there was something to this. It was, maybe the tipping point for Matt Malley, because he was gone shortly after. Well, so Charlie and I talked for probably, 5 minutes or something like that. And unfortunately, there was one of those things where someone came to ask him something, and the second his back was turned, folks stepped in. Okay, come on.
Right.
Hold us away. So.
Right. Well, so again, just coming back to the book, as someone who's been a fan, and I've been a fan for 30 years, like the first show I saw was in, I think it was 96, but I was supposed to see him in 94. I've seen him over 50 times. I've met him multiple times at meet and greets. I've met him at, after shows randomly at hotels. The first show I saw, he was hanging around on the side, and then the band let us stay there and meet him. And I've had all these opportunities, but I always kind of get choked up about it. And 2, if I was writing it, I would probably just do it from such a fan perspective. And that's what I love about the book, is that, to your point, I can see, I was trying to see if I could see you through the writing, right? And so maybe one thing that I saw, which I'm going to ask you about, but for the most part, it's really just factual. It's actual quotes from all the band members. And I had not heard about the Rolling Stone. So it also made me question, am I actually a huge fan? I hadn't heard about that. There's a couple other ones I'm going to throw at you, and we can take it whatever direction you'd like. Yeah. I had not heard about the Eddie Vedder Coca-Cola disagreement. Had never heard about that. I'd never heard about this incredible note, which ties into some other themes I want to ask you about. But you have a story about how the producer for Covering the Satellites thought it was very notable that at the breakfast table, when they were recording the album, the band was talking about trading stocks and things like that during breakfast. That was an incredible nugget. I don't want to go through all of them because I couldn't anyway, but there are so many good ones. But those really surprised me. And then also the Madonna connection, I had no idea about. So there's a bunch of other things in there, but were any of those really surprising to you when you were writing it? I had not heard any of them.
Every single one of them. And the same thing. I thought I was a huge fan. And every time I dug into the story, I kept finding these little gems and nuggets. And to me, that was what was so fun, because I said there's no way everybody knows all this stuff, because I've been a fan. I've been following this band. I thought I had the story pretty much down, the parameters of it. But I kept finding these little gems, and even things like the thing about the private schools that he went to when he was,
right.
in high school.
Yeah.
He went to this private school in Connecticut for a year.
Right.
He went to the reunion. He talked about it on stage. There's a whole, sort of story there that all these just pieces of his life that I didn't know. So
yeah.
I didn't really know the sort of differences between Jennifer Aniston and Courtney Cox, the very sort of different experiences that he had with those two women. And, and even things like the Coca-Cola commercial, I certainly knew about the commercial, but there was so much more to it that I maybe didn't understand. So yeah, I wanted it to be something that the fans would really just love and love those little nuggets and finding the little things. But also at the same time, I didn't want it to be so totally obsessive and overboard that it was impenetrable. There's like, for example, a lot of stuff about the types of microphones that were used on the August and recovering the satellites. There's a lot of details about the types of microphones, the specifics of, and I thought most people just don't care that much, about knowing that it was the such and such and such. I know that the super fans and the audiophiles do. I find those details kind of interesting, but to me, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't alienating people who weren't super fans, I guess.
Well, you do mention, which I also thought was interesting, about like how much money, I don't know if you quantify it necessarily, but they spent a ton of money setting up these houses to be recording studios to get the right sounds. And you also detail across all of their albums, essentially like how place and producer and also contributes to what the output is. So I think those things are all very fascinating. And I even in the intro, I agree with you. I think the book is for super fans, of course, yes, but also just people who are like maybe music fans or 90s, like late 90s, 2000s fans. Like you can get into this even if you're not like the most diehard Counting Crows fan. But there's kind of a through line, and I want to ask you about it because it's a take that maybe because I'm too deep into the Counting Crows that I have never really considered. I might have heard it back in the day, but there was a quote that you had, and I'm just gonna read it. But at some point in your book, you say, "In the minds of critics, they were fat, coke shilling, Sun City playing corporate hacks who'd do anything for a buck. Even self-described devoted fans such as Paste Magazine's Kate Kiefer viewed the Triple Play tour as a new low." Her quote was, "I tried to justify it, but I eventually faced the facts. Opening for a washed-up grunge pop band at the Blair County Ballpark in Altoona, Pennsylvania, can't really be construed as a good thing." And I thought that it was a take where you kind of talk about this throughout, even the genesis of the band with Adam's dreadlocks and the outfits, and then it kind of a through line to, certain people's perspectives that this was like a manufactured band, which I'd never thought of because to me, it's just been such an organic relationship through all these years. But I guess like, how do you feel about that in general? I mean, is that a take that you think there's some truth to that? Or do you think that that's more just people being overly critical of a band that's been around for 30 years and has had a lot of different twists and turns? Like, where do you stand on that?
Well, it's a great question. Sorry, I want to kind of take a minute because I want to make sure that I kind of make my don't say the wrong thing.
No problem. I can pause. I can pause this too. I was just.
No, I think it's a good question.
Again, I asked this question because you have this unique perspective and you brought forward some of these things that maybe as like a diehard fan, I just avoided the critique, right? Like a friend of mine's older brother used to like give us a hard time about it. And I'd be like, you don't understand, while this might not be our generation's like Beatles per se, to me, they were. So I kind of avoided the negative takes. Although if you listened to my first podcast with my review, of the Troubadour show they had recently, I am critical about some of their song choices and creative choices, but I never questioned the integrity of the band. And I think what's interesting about your book is that I don't think that I started to, but it did make me aware of, some of the machinations, what was happening behind the scenes in the band, and how, for better or for worse, Adam has looked at this like this is a business. Like, we're going to do this. I have a lot of people that are employed due to my songwriting abilities in our band, and so that balance of like artistic, creative stuff, but also business, was just interesting to me. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah, that's a good question. So two things. One is that this is a band, and this came out a little bit more to me when I was writing and researching their story. This is a band where there's always been a backlash. Like, as soon as they were successful, there were critics who were, like decrying all of these things, the way that he sang and the way that he looked. Often they were very personal critiques directed towards Adam. So there was always this backlash at the same time. It didn't like come later. It came at the same time as the success, which was odd because he had to sort of negotiate being very famous and also having people who really didn't like the band a lot,
Right.
So I think that was interesting. And also to me, the story itself is his story is interesting because he was 29 years old when this all happened. So this isn't the typical story of the 21-year-old rock star, and all of that.
Right.
At the same time, so there was this sort of business element. I think, to me, two things came out in the researching of the book. One, I didn't realize the degree to which behind the scenes figures did help, to put together the band. I think Gary Gersh, I think T-Bone Burnett, I think there were these key figures who got very involved in what that first album became,
Right.
And then the band kind of took it from there. So I think, and Adam said this too in some interviews, that he always saw that first album as kind of the most manufactured because they had to really change what they were into being something else.
Right.
Then by the second album, they've been on the road and they know who they are. They've gelled as a band, and it's a whole different experience recording it. So, I think it's an interesting story. And part of what is interesting is that, to me, and I thought this as a fan too, that the band, made some maybe questionable decisions even early on, like associating so heavily with VH1 and MTV. And certainly the Coca-Cola commercial was hard to defend as a fan. And I remember, one of my friends coming to me, "You're a big Counting Crows fan. Have you seen this?" And I'm going, "Oh man, it's hard, it's really hard to kind of watch."
Right. I thought MTV and VH1 was a problem because that really was the center of pop culture. Now, it might not have been like on the bleeding edge of whatever was hip, but I mean, I actually thought that the Storytellers piece, which you noted some critiques of that within the, I always thought that was like untouchable. I always thought that everyone just had assumed that was like the greatest thing ever done. So that was interesting for me to see that there are some people who thought, no, that wasn't that cool. Because to me, I was like, that was an iconic double album that everybody seemed to have back in the day. Even non-Counting Crows fans seemed to have that album,
There was a sense that this band is too new to be putting out a live album,
Right.
That was sort of like, you're overstepping your boundary here. You don't know your place. You have to wait until you're 4 albums in, or whatever the rule is.
Right.
So,
right. Well, I think that is interesting because so again, kind of talking about the band being this kind of machine or this kind of corporately put together group, and me not having that impression. And I feel like in some ways, people's backlash used to be that the band would make these new versions of the songs and be like, I want to go to a concert, I want to hear the same song. And I was like, I want to go to the concert and hear him off the top of his head say something interesting, which is why I gave the band a hard time on the first episode, because I was like, how could you get me in the Troubadour, iconic place, and then play me all of Butter Miracle? No disrespect, but out of all of your songs, I'm not sure I need all 4 of those in a 15 song set list. And then also, with him giving speeches and these things, I always thought that was so unique. And I know other performers have done that over the years, but like for my generation, that was the first band that did that. And I thought, that's taking a chance. That's taking a song and you're going to do something different. And you might see him do an acoustic set on this day, and maybe they're going to play some weird instrument on the next day. And like, I don't know. I thought that was all interesting. And to your point, what's funny about the history of the band is that, to your quote you just had about August and Everything After, that Adam in some ways looks at like August and Everything After was actually, they stripped away their instruments. They made him play in this house. They made him live together. They took these songs that might have been more like progressive rock style and like made him more like folksy. And so even though that one is the one where I think like, oh, that's the band's true sound, really that was their sound and other people's creative influences coming together. And so it's almost the opposite, where now maybe as they've gone through their trajectory, they sound more like themselves, what they really wanted to sound like. Does that make sense? Like it's almost the reverse progression.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that time on the road too, for them and many bands, is really important. Look at how great the second Black Crowes album was, for example, because at that point they had been out on the road for all this time, at gelled, written songs, road tested songs. There was a lot of them on that second album. So,
right.
I think, it changed a lot. One of the things that to me was very interesting about, their story was each album had something totally different going on. And because I wondered, is Desert Life going to be as interesting as Recovering the Satellites?
Right.
But each one, there was a whole bunch of, different things. Hard Candy was the Coca-Cola stuff. And,
right.
Like during Desert Life, Geffen basically folds and becomes Interscope. And now they're label mates with Eminem and Limp Bizkit.
Right. And they want to release like an 8.5-minute single. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which I thought was interesting.
Right.
But you also, I wanted to ask you, this is a little bit more of a personal question, but in terms of you just saw a show, which I will tell you that we almost did an emergency podcast when I saw the set list for the Omaha show, because I was like, that's the set list I would have loved to see at the Troubadour. It was like, I thought it was pretty awesome. But I guess one, your thoughts maybe on that. And then two, it felt like to me when I was reading the book that you had a soft spot for Saturday nights and Sunday mornings as an album. But I guess how have your feelings evolved on the band's progression through their different albums and their different periods? Like, are you as big of a fan of Butter Miracle as you are of August and Everything After? You don't have to rank them all, but like, how have you felt about how they've progressed as they've gone through?
Well, to your earlier point about the Omaha show, what was so great about that show was that because Dan Vickery was not on hand between the sound check and the performance, he was gone. So they had to throw out the set list that they had planned and scramble to come up with a new one. What can we all play? And suddenly Dave Bryson's playing lead solos. And I mean, it was very interesting because you're seeing something that was unrehearsed and like, we're just going to kind of jump in here and play the songs and figure out who could do what. So Emmy was amazing and Dave Bryson really stepped up, and they had to change things around and do things differently. And it was very exciting to see them do that. Now, what was so disappointing was to see them then go play the same darn set list over and over and over again the last several nights in a row. I mean,
it's like the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, right. It's like and to me, it's like, you telling me you can't go do Walkaways, that's not possible with Dan Vickery, out. Right. There's so many songs, like go play title track for August Is Everything After,
right.
Like, bust out the piano. Let's get really creative here. That's what the fans like us want to see. And they won't give it to us. And, for years I said they were, I got turned off of them because I used to say they were a really lazy band.
Right.
Even though I love them, they were very lazy, and they've only put out 6 albums in 30 years. I mean, they are kind of lazy.
Right.
But I realized in writing the book that it's not that they're lazy. They're just on the road all the time.
Right.
They're always on the road.
Right.
So I thought these guys were just sitting around, in their massive New York apartments, but they're touring and keeping the whole thing afloat. So
right.
Maybe that's to their credit. So, to me, I'm like many of the big fans. I always want the deep cuts, the interesting things. I want to see the band stretch creatively. But I'll also say this, the super fans see them over and over again and are disappointed. I hadn't seen them in years. And so to me, I don't care if they play whatever, go ahead and play round here and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to enjoy it because I haven't seen it 5 times in the last 2 years. And, I'm rolling my eyes at the set list. I know I am one of those fans, but
right.
If you don't go all the time, it takes away some of it, it's better.
Right.
So as for the band's trajectory, I was somebody who hated Saturday nights and Sunday morning
when
it came out. that was kind of the end of the road for me as a fan. I was like, I was not feeling that album. And so when I came back to it for the book, I was kind of intrigued because I thought this is going to be interesting to listen to this again and really immerse myself in the album and the shows that were going on around that time. And I came to have a different opinion of it. I came to like it a lot more than I did originally, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Found a lot of things that I liked about it. But I still, to me, that's an album where it doesn't have, those classic cuts, one after the other. It's got a lot of kind of B plus material to me.
Right.
Even still, that would be my take. Although, hey, a great band doing B plus material, why not?
Right. Right.
And I do. I mean, I love, Michelangelo and Come Around, and there's many songs on there. I think Insignificant is a very cool song. I like that album a lot more than I ever did, but most of that came from writing this book. Before that, I hadn't spent very much time with it because I thought, this is not that great. So
it's funny.
Maybe I have a new soft spot for
it. Yeah. I forget. It was just some part of the book I was reading, and I was like, it seems like he might like this one better. And I'm with you. I think, look, I mean, one of the quotes you have in there is basically about, hey, look, from Adam was like, people are still coming to our shows. We're not the center of culture, but a lot of those bands, who were the center of culture for 5 seconds don't even exist anymore. And it's like, yeah, hats off to this band, this guy, this group of people, right? They've been doing it. And I've been going. I've spent thousands of dollars and tons of time and traveled around because they are so good live. And even when they play songs that I don't necessarily like, I think they're great, But it's interesting because about the albums piece, I almost have thought that in some ways what you wrote validated my impression of the band and what they could have been. I felt almost like when you have someone who's such a strong performer and artist like Adam and all these guys, like Charlie, all these guys are really good at what they do, that you sometimes need someone who's like another strong voice, like a Gary Gersh or a T-Bone Burnett, to say like, hey, you know what you're doing is awesome, but here's something that like I do that's awesome. And when those two things come together, it's difficult, and maybe you go through that dip, but what comes out on the other side is even more incredible. And I feel like as they had gained more artistic control throughout their like discography, if you will, I almost feel like you get good songs, but I feel like they can be a little like sloppy. Do you know what I mean? Like that there was someone who was able to push back and say, hey, Scarecrow is a good song, but we could try it this way or whatever. It could be an amazing song. And I think Saturday Nights and Sunday Mornings is kind of where that starts, because I think Insignificant actually is one of my favorite deep cuts. Like, I think it's an awesome song. I think that album's great. I saw them perform at like the Yahoo live show at the Sony Studios, a couple hundred people. They played the whole album through, and it was really good. But a lot of those songs are kind of forgotten. And then as each progressive album has come out from there, I felt like, I wish someone could help rein it in a little bit. But then, kind of like you, if I see it live or I start listening to it again, I actually find myself, I can't believe I'm saying it's, listening to like Somewhere Under Wonderland a lot. And I'm like, what am I listening to? I don't even like this album, I don't think, but I keep listening to it. So I do think maybe, as I've mentioned previous on the podcast, A, my expectations are probably too high, but B, seeing everything compiled in the way that you compiled it made me realize, like, I'm even just more impressed that they've made it this long and continue to put out new music. Does that mean I want to see, Bobby and the Rat Kings again in concert? No, I don't want to see that song again in concert. But hey, hats off to them for continuing to churn out good material, relevant material, and bring people in. Every show I go to, well, for the most part, has been pretty well attended. So obviously they resonate with folks. So
yeah. Do you have a favorite album or song? You're a fan.
Wow.
So
yeah.
You can tell us.
That's so funny. I was trying to think about this. I think that I would have said This Desert Life probably as my favorite album. I would say that I was thinking Live at the Heineken Music Hall, actually, as a live album. My friend said you can't really say that's not an album, but like, they released it. You can buy it in a record store. I think that's a pretty good compilation of some of my favorite stuff. So I like that. But what I like is similar to you is like, and you touched on stuff that I'd never heard of around like the deep cuts. So like Barely Out of Tuesday, I think is a great song. And I wish that we would hear that more. Baby, I'm a Big Star Now. Like that's a good one, right? That's a really good one. And you talk about a lot of those things in here. And I wish that there would be, I don't know. I don't know how they can weave them in. August and Everything After, right? I've heard that played live. Some of these songs where I just think that even Einstein on the Beach, I'm not a huge fan, but people always ask me, they're like, you're the Crows guy. Why don't they play that song? And I'm like, well, Adam kind of thinks it's this trivial pop song that he wrote and they put it on. He doesn't really think. And I'm like, yeah, but it's a good song. Like people would like to hear it. So some of that creative integrity or not wanting to play Barely Out of Tuesday, maybe because you wrote it with Courtney Cox or whatever the reason is, don't take that on me. Let me hear it live. It's a great song,
Right. Yeah.
So I like that kind of stuff. But
yeah, absolutely. Well, again, I tried to touch on those deep cuts and outtakes and things that were recorded for this album or that album that people might not have heard. But you can go so much further. There's all the live stuff and the way that things change live and the things that he talks about in concert too. I mean, you could have a book like twice as long, but again, I was trying not to overwhelm the people who were kind of new to the story. I was so impressed by his ability to, I don't know if you call it write on command, but decide, okay, I'm going to write a song for Shrek. And I mean, he nails it. I'm going to write a song that like, we're a live band that everybody sings along with in concert, and he writes Hanging Around,
right,
which is one of my very least favorite Counting Crows songs. and of course they always play it. And
you're welcome.
Yeah. Right. And, but he writes a song that achieves that goal exactly, and it's a hit too, and everyone loves it. So who am I to say,
Right.
His ability to sort of be strategic in his songwriting was impressive to me when I put it all together and saw the different points in his career when he was doing that. And then, also, I mean, back to the integrity thing, this was a group that prided themselves so early on, we won't lip sync. We're not going to be on top of the pops.
Right.
We're not going to, play Mr. Jones first on Saturday Night Live.
Right.
And I think one of the reasons that they got such pushback for, things like the Coke commercial or aligning so heavily with MTV and VH1 was because that earlier stance of, almost like a Pearl Jam like credibility, resisting the corporate forces. And, I think that was part of the reason for, that they got nailed.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree with you. And I could talk to you about this for hours. I have one final thing that I wanted to ask you, because I know that we are coming up on time here, but I wanted to just ask, because you had a quote in there and I thought this was an interesting one. And I thought this would be a good way to sum up, our discussion today. But so there's a quote in the book that you have, and it says that Adam was unconcerned about his legacy. Quote, "Do we get the respect we deserve? I don't know what we effing deserve. I think there are always going to be bands that are critical darlings. I started off my career playing at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as an unknown band. I don't know that I would even show up if we got into it now." End quote. I guess my question for you is, do you believe that? Do you believe that Adam, and specifically Adam, but Adam and the Counting Crows are not really concerned about their place in rock and roll history, and their place in music at this point in their career? Or, alternatively, do you think that they actually really do care, and they're always striving to be kind of a relevant band?
I think Adam rightfully feels that the band has not been given due credit. I mean, I think it's insane that they're not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and like the Go-Go's are, and I love the Go-Go's. They should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But are you telling me that the Counting Crows are not in the Hall of Fame and the Go-Go's are? I mean, put them up song for song, album for album, career for career, whatever. To me, that's wrong. So I think that Adam feels like the band has not been, given their respect or their critical due. And I would agree with that. I agree with this. So I think that his stance is probably, to some degree, a justification of the fact that they, haven't been given their rightful critical acclaim. But
Right.
I just think, this is one of the great American bands. To me, they're right alongside, like, whatever, Tom Petty or REM or, Bruce Springsteen or, you can sort of go on and on. Pearl Jam, these great American bands, with a deep catalog of great songs. It's amazing how many members of the original group are still intact, still playing together, still seem to get along.
Yeah.
They do deserve some credit. I mean, us fans, yes, we knock them for the playlists and the song selections and not, really not, the band's lack of respect for its own catalog, I think, is where it comes from. Like, how can you not play these songs?
Right.
And we'd all love them. We're all super fans who are coming to see these shows. But, something that amazed me is I was in LaGuardia Airport a couple of months ago, and Elevator Boots is playing over the intercom system. And I'm like, there's the new, it's not the old Counting Crows, not Mr. Jones. It's their new
stuff.
Song, it's playing at the LaGuardia Airport. And then I'm with my kids in Branson, Missouri at some, carnival ride, and Mr. Jones is playing. And then I'm at something else the other day, and their cover of Big Yellow Taxi's on.
Right.
The grocery store, I think it was. And I'm thinking, everywhere you go, this band is still, their music is still playing. Their old stuff, their new stuff, their cover songs are playing. Everywhere I go, I hear this band, and they're still out touring and still playing. So, yeah, I can see why Adam feels that way. And I think, honestly, he just at some point kind of gave up a little bit on the whole thing and just said, here's what I'm willing to do. And,
take it or leave it.
And I'll give it everything I can. I do think, though, my take after writing the book is that he still means it.
Mm-hmm.
He is and was an artist. He made very artistic choices when he did things like This Desert Life.
Right.
He was trying to do something different and kind of reverse course, but he did it in an artistic way. He never repeated himself and said, well, he could have gotten T-Bone Burnett to do the second album, but he said, no, we're not going to do that. And to me, I always respected the band so much for those choices. And I guess I wanted to make sure that you saw those parts in the book too, because they deserve a lot of credit for, the artistic choices that they've made along the way, and not just saying, okay, we're going to do a bunch of Accidentally in Love, Einstein on the Beach type of songs.
I totally agree. And people can't see, you can see me, but people won't be able to see me. I have a big smile on my face, especially as you go through someone with yourself who has the acumen and the background knowledge and, the understanding of music to place Counting Crows along these other icons of American music. And as I said, I think I always felt like, I was just in this corner with like this small group of people that thought this band was great. But really, there's just no denying their impact on the American music scene, especially for the longevity and the creative output, to your point. And I think I feel the same way. And I think it's when I'm giving him a hard time about stuff, it's more like, I just want to see Up All Night. Can you just do it for me? But what does come across in your book is that this is a band that, has a very strong personality at the center of it, but they've got great musicianship around him, and they made creative choices intentionally to be true to themselves, but also with the foresight of knowing that bands that just did the same thing over and over again, there's some mentions of like Hootie and the Blowfish or some others, maybe won't last as long. And so they really challenged themselves to provide kind of new music and new takes and even new instruments and all this stuff. But the one consistent thing was a real quality craftsmanship of writing and playing, and then also touring constantly. And so every year I line up to buy tickets because I keep saying this could be the last year. And fortunately for me, it hasn't ever been that. And I assume they'll go until, they just can't do it anymore. And so I feel very fortunate with that. But I wanted to... go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I got to ask you, what was the best one? You've seen all these shows. You've seen more shows than anyone. What was the best show? Yeah,
wow. That's a great question. I think there's a couple that stand out to me. One, there was a slate. They did 3 in a row at the Wiltern. This was basically right after this this was like the Hard Candy tour. And so they really couldn't play a bad song at that point, in my opinion. Like every album was awesome. So it was like, they couldn't make any wrong turns. And we were in the front row, and that's where we ran into Adam after the show. And he was like, I remember you guys were in the front row, and we got to talk to him for a little bit. That was great. And then recently they played with Matchbox 20, and I'm also a Matchbox 20 fan. And they both played like 20 songs plus front row again, did the meet and greet, got to spend some time with him. And that was really cool. I'd say those are probably the two best that I can remember from recent times. So, but I wanted to thank you again. We could have you back and we could do this again for another hour.
Yeah, right.
But like, seriously, it's not just the fact that you're a fan, as we pointed out, and as the band confirmed to you. It's like, it may have been a labor of love to start out with, but the way that you approached it, the professionalism, the research, the way you set the book up, it just, it's a great read, but it's also super informative, and it's not just a hot take from a fan or something. So I wanted to give you just, again, a thank you, because I've been wanting this my whole life, and I'm sure people listening to this will feel the same way after they read it. So thank you very much for the book, and I appreciate you coming on. Where can people get this book? I mentioned Amazon in the opener, but is there a place that they should be directed to get the book?
Yes, just go to Amazon and get it. Right now it's Amazon, because that's where we all buy books. But
right.
I wanted to sort of get everything finalized with it, make sure everything was correct, make sure if there was an error that I got a typo that I got it fixed. So now I'm gonna widen the distribution a little bit so that you'll be able to get it other places. But right now you can get it on as an ebook or as a paperback on Amazon. And I wanted to also just say thank you for your kind words on the book, because coming from a true fan like yourself, that means everything. And I wrote it for all of us fans who love them so much. And also, like, they deserve to have a book like this. They deserve, if all these other bands have books out, that talk about their albums, and, here the great, Warren Zane's book on the new Springsteen book. Why doesn't Counting Crows have a book? So I agree. Now they do. And I do hope that the fans will read it and love it. And I hope that someday Adam will do that second follow-up interview.
I was just going to say, I'm sure the fans will love it. And I absolutely hope Adam takes you up on the offer to write it, because that would just be amazing. I think you've clearly demonstrated that you're a serious writer, and, he could help maybe unlock even more kind of mysteries about the band. But thanks again, Geoff. Really nice meeting you. Everyone, make sure to check out the book. It's a great read. And thanks again for your time, Geoff.